Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. My name is Dean Jones, and this is Season 8, Episode 15 of the podcast. Today I'm very honored to have on my program Andreas Viestad, who is a food writer, TV chef. I'm sure you've seen him on NPR's television show, New Scandinavian Cooking, and he is a restaurateur. He's a food activist, and he's a journalist. He wears so many hats, and he's just an amazing person. And I'm so much honored to have him on this podcast today. He also is the founder of the Geitmyra Culinary Center for Children in Norway, and he addresses the issue of food knowledge for kids and having them, learn about food and understand where food comes from and how it's prepared and more. He's the author of Kitchen of Light, and Where Flavor Was Born. And he has a new book out. It's a food writing book, Dinner in Rome, which talks about food and where it comes from in history and how it came to be now on our plate. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to Andreas. He was a wonderful guest and is full of so much information and insight. And I really think you're going to love this episode. So without further ado, I'm going to take you right to my conversation with Andreas Viestad about his book, Dinner in Rome, that is out now. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I am speaking with Andreas Viestad, who is a food writer, TV chef, restaurateur, journalist, and food activist. He is the longtime host of the New Scandinavian Cooking, airing on PBS in the United States and in over 50 countries. A former columnist for the Washington Post and a founder of Geitmyra Culinary Center for Children in Norway. He is the author of Kitchen of Light and Where Flavor Was Born, and has a new book out on the date of this airing, Dinner in Rome. Andreas, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, what was your aha moment when you realized you wanted to become a chef?
Well, the funny thing in a way is that I never became a chef. I worked with food my entire adult life, but I started out studying history at the university. And in a way, that got me through the rabbit hole of curiosity. And I've always been super interested in food. But in a way, I've skidded along and not, I've looked at food through storytelling, through the history of food has always been incredibly important to me. But in a way, with this book, A Dinner in Rome, I've gone full circle. All the things I care and love about. I have this deep interest in where we come from and history, but I want to see that in connection to one of the things that really makes life meaningful, namely food. And I've tried to combine those things by writing about this meal in Rome and how that can be a window back into history.
Your TV show and your videos really kind of bring out and highlight your love of Norwegian food and cooking. And I really loved watching them to kind of get an idea of you when I wanted to do the interview. And I was really intrigued just because you use such wonderful flavors, and I really got very interested in the food. Some people say that you kind of put Norwegian food on the map. How do you feel about that assertion?
Well, I think that's a great compliment, and I think to me the show New Scandinavian Cooking was born out of living in the United States, because I'd always come from this little place in the outskirts of the world, and I'd looked at the rest of the world with curiosity and hunger, and thinking everything else is exotic. And then living in Boston for a couple of years, I started reflecting on my own heritage, and I thought, there are a few things that we have, many things that we don't have, but there are a few things that we have that are incredibly exotic, and some of them are really unique. And I wanted to tell that story because I thought, that was the first question that my friends would ask me, what's the food like where you come from? And I wanted to give a kind of elaborate answer to that question. And the answer became a television series that has been running for more than 15 years.
You had an episode, you had like a segment that I really loved. It was the Norwegian taco. And to me, it was fun because it really highlighted not only just the food, but also the flavors that you use in your cooking. I really was intrigued by this, and I wanted to see more because normally when I've heard of Norwegian cooking, I always hear about, of course, lutefisk, and that's basically all you ever hear about. But you've done a lot of other things, and you kind of added a lot and brought more out to the public. What were some of the things?
Lutefisk is I think one of the things that we have done it once, but I mean that was just in passing. Otherwise, we've done everything else. We wanted to show a really different image of Norwegian cooking, and I think that you mentioned the Norwegian taco. The funny story is that we in Norway, as in so many other countries, we eat a version of something that we call taco, but it's not really something that a Mexican wouldn't necessarily recognize it as a taco. And I feel that is in a way some sort of culinary poverty by emulating another culture's cuisine without really knowing what it is.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting when I found that there is a tradition of eating a flatbread, kind of semi-soft, semi-hard flatbread filled with mincemeat and vegetables and spices, and that is a traditional food in a particular part of Norway, and no one really knows. And I think that most cultures do have a version of a flatbread filled with some food. And I think that is much more fun if we can say, okay, I really love Mexican taco, but I also really love the idea that we can create something based on our own cultures.
Now, I've been reading that you spend a lot of time fighting culinary illiteracy. We've had a lot of guests in the program that are very passionate about this. Can you talk to me about your passion for this topic?
Well, I think that when we talk about food, we often talk about restaurants, and you and I, we meet, and we plan for a great dinner, and we meet on Saturday. Let them watch television and enjoy some fast food. Whereas I think that the food culture is not the food that we eat when we celebrate. It's the food we eat every day, and I think that we've come to a sort of stage in our civilization where we take food for granted. We don't know where food comes from, and then what kind of knowledge do kids have growing up if they grow up without knowing how to cook, without knowing where food comes from? And I've been incredibly inspired by Alice Waters and her project, The Edible Schoolyard. And 12 years ago, I came across an old dilapidated farm in the middle of my home city, Oslo, that's called Geitmyra. And I applied to rent it from the municipality, and I started a nonprofit, a culinary center for children, where we do educational programs. And it has grown. So we're now in 4 cities, and we're opening in the 5th city, hopefully next year. And we've even had Alice Waters coming to visit. So that is a fantastic thing. So she considers us among her children in a way.
That's wonderful. She's done so much great things here, and we really, really love her. She's a very beloved local.
Mm. And one of the things that, sometimes it's easy to complain about all the things that are bad.
Right.
Our food culture is threatened. It is a problem that there is some sort of level of culinary illiteracy going on in society. But one of the things that we do see every day is that when we let kids experience the joy of cooking, it leads to deep appreciation of one of the finest things in life, but also building knowledge in a great way. So kids that may struggle a bit with mathematics, but who are really good at cooking, they start doing numbers, when you're doing a recipe and stuff like that. So it is a type of practical knowledge that in this digital world we do not, we don't have that many examples of this.
I'd like to talk about your TV show. How did you come to have a TV show, and what did you want to bring to the table when you started thinking about how you were going to do the TV show?
Well, as I mentioned, I was living in Boston, and I started working on a book because I thought it would be fun to do a book from Norway about Scandinavian cooking and presenting it in a different way than some people might have some sort of rudimentary knowledge of one aspect of Scandinavian food if they've grown up in the Midwest. But apart from that, Scandinavian cooking was totally unknown. And I thought it would be fun to do a book. And then while I was writing on the book proposal, I thought it would be fun to do a television show. And me and a friend approached American public television, and there was strong interest. And within 6 months, we were in production. And it's only a bit later I found out that that's not how it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to be a long and tedious road to nothingness. But for us, it was super easy. We just had a good suggestion, and we went in with it, and everyone cheered us along, and it became a long running show.
Food and cooking had been around on TV for quite some time. And I grew up watching so many great TV shows, largely through PBS, which was normally one of the only venues we could watch cooking shows on. And then now, as you've seen, food is everywhere on TV. Netflix, Hulu all have food. Home and Garden, all these different channels all have food all over that. What do you attribute to the explosion that we've had, the interest of food in different contexts? Do you think it was the pandemic, or is there another reason?
Well, I do think also the interest in food has many layers, and I think that to me, food is a cultural expression. So and it's a practical and physical thing. And I think that for me, writing about since my last book is about food and history. I mean, if we write about food and history without writing about the taste aspect of it, then I think you're not doing it justice. But I also think that this sort of abundance of single recipes and how to make double chocolate chip cookies is not really an expression of an interest in food. I think it's an expression of something else, like a cultural restlessness that has come over us all. We want something, we want it now, we want it to be fast, we want it to be flashy. And whether I've been doing the television show or cookbooks or this last book, Dinner in Rome, which is a food history, it's really a history and travel book. But I want all of these aspects. I want you to be able to taste it. I want you to be able to understand it. I want you to be able to put it in context with, in the case Dinner in Rome, I want you to feel that you're sitting at this restaurant table in Rome, but I also want you to reflect on where do we come from as like a Western culture that has been born out of the Roman Empire, but also who are we as humans? We are this sort of this strange animal that is not an animal, that has built not only an interest around food, but a culture very much based on food. And I think we need to separate. I feel sometimes quite lonely in a way, having these sort of this insistence that we should see food in a context, because it's very often become almost like a pornography-like thing where you're supposed to just watch it and get a kick out of these sort of snippets of food-related thing, but it doesn't tell us anything about who we are as a collective, as a society, as a history. And I think that it has its role, but I think that role has become multiplied into too much.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. Now, since we're talking about dinner in Rome, I want to go over this book a little bit because I really enjoyed reading it, and I was really surprised at some of the different places that you took us in the book. I think a lot of people might think it's just about food, and it is largely about food, of course, but it like has a lot of different parts to it that I found really interesting. Like you talk about the origins of the mafia, how the popularity of sugar led to the slave trade. You highlight topics of the importance of salt and where pasta originated. Do you want to talk about the book a bit and some of the places you're taking the reader, and what surprised you in the research? What was kind of the wow moments you had doing research for the book?
Let us just sort of put it in context for those who don't know the book. The book is called Dinner in Rome, and it is a book that it has, the main narrative of it is just me walking a couple of hundred steps to my favorite restaurant, La Carbonara in Campo di Fiore in the middle of Rome, and sitting down and enjoying a meal, a really good meal, but not a spectacular meal, a very traditional Italian meal. I just love it. But the reason I wanted, and through that meal, I want to tell the story of the origin of some of the ingredients, some of the dishes that I eat, but also to tell how food has shaped history. I think that, very often we think that history is the result of the intervention of, generals or kings or whatever. But in, the Roman Empire wasn't built by Caesar. It was built by this unique food system that the Roman Empire had managed to create. And it's the same with so many of the other things that we take for granted: the salt, the pepper, all of these has this fantastic story. And I think the origin of the book was really my visits to Rome with my wife, who's an archaeologist. And archaeologists, they have this fantastic ability to look at a piece of marble or a piece of stone, the ruin of a building long since gone, and then they will build that building up again and say, this is how the building was. This is what the people inside would do or believe. And I love archaeology. But then also at the end of a long day in Rome, you typically sit down and finally you are free from this history lesson that the eternal city is. And you just sit down and you relax and you enjoy some really good food and good wine. But my claim, in a way, in the book was to say that you can read just as much out of the food that we eat than looking at marble buildings. And so I claim that there's more history in a bowl of pasta than there is in the Colosseum. And that's really my method, going through flavors and meals and show them how they help shape the world. When you sit down for dinner tonight, you're probably going to grind some pepper over your steak or your piece of chicken or whatever, and you won't give it more thought. But the fact that pepper was one of the most sought after commodities in the world profoundly changed the world. It led to the age of exploration. Without pepper, Columbus wouldn't have ventured west. He had this grand idea that I'll find a lot of pepper on the other side of that great ocean. Of course, he didn't find it, but it did help change history. And I think that is really fascinating, and it really makes the experience of the food we eat, both the extraordinary food and the ordinary food, really much more interesting.
Did your love of doing research about food in this vein start when you wrote your book Where Flavor Was Born? In this book, you explored culinary wonders along the legendary spice route from Zanzibar to India to Bali. Was that where you started kind of doing what you called your culinary archaeology?
Yeah, I think that was the first big project. I'd always been really interested in combining food and history in my columns and cookbooks. I've written multiple cookbooks in my own tribal language in Norway as well, and written extensively for newspapers. But with Where Flavor Was Born, I wanted to present almost like a theory on the origin of flavors, whereas the Indian Ocean is a vast ocean that spans from the southern tip of Africa all along the eastern coast of Africa, and then the Arabian Peninsula. If you look at it sort of generously, it also includes countries like Iran, and then down to the Indian subcontinent, and Thailand and Indonesia, and all the islands in between. And my claim was that even though these cultures are so different, the food is almost like dialects of the same language, because they share the same spices and this millennia-old spice root. So yes, and I elaborate a bit on that also in Dinner in Rome, where I write about particularly pepper, and how the myths surrounding the spices were so important in ancient societies. It was these sort of postcards from an unknown world. You had these maps that's ended in sort of white areas where you had monsters or whatever. You didn't know what was on the other side, but there was something, because you had these tangible examples of it. Pepper and cinnamon and allspice and all of these wonderful things. And imagine being a person living in the Roman Empire in 2,000 years ago. You would know quite a lot about your local community. If you lived in one of the bigger cities, you might know something about the Roman Empire and its how vast it was, basically. And then if you were part of the sort of educated elite, you might know a lot about the Roman Empire, but you would still know almost nothing about the world beyond. But you would be able to appreciate it, and you would hear these fantastic stories about where the spices came from, and it helped trigger the curiosity of humanity, and it made the world bigger. And I think food still makes the world bigger, because if you travel to a foreign country, you might not really get to know the people who live there. I remember I was in Thailand, and it is a really fascinating country, but you don't really get to know the Thai people if you're there for a week or two, but you do get a profound feeling of closeness to their unique culture through the food you eat. And it's the same basically with every place in the world.
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying that, because I hear when people talk about other cultures, they always mention food and they usually get it wrong. Like, I've heard so many times you say Scotland and people say, oh, haggis. And I'm like, well, actually haggis isn't so bad. And they eat other things than haggis, and a lot of people don't know anything about Scandinavian food. They don't really know what to think of. They might think of gravlax or something, but they don't really know. And in your first book, Kitchen of Light, you really took Scandinavian dishes and made them contemporary, and you kind of brought them to the forefront so people can have an idea of what people in Scandinavian countries eat. What was your intent when you created the book, and what did you want to kind of show people who are reading it?
I wanted to to try and just create a different narrative than this narrative that came out of people who grew up in the Midwest and had these strange dishes that, you know, the lutefisk you mentioned. Not everyone knows it, but it's a very peculiar kind of it's dried fish that is reconstituted in an alkaline solution, so it has this sort of jelly-like texture, and it's not really a particularly common food in Norway. You know, some people will eat it as more like a tradition thing. So I wanted to just look at Scandinavia as if I was an unprejudiced person discovering it and discovering some of the same qualities of it as with French or Italian food, but not trying to be French or Italian. Because I mean, there are, you know, the ducks are fatter in France. The olive oil is, we don't have it, but we do have other things. And, you know, the fact that Norway is far north has some limitations, but it also leads to a fantastic emphasis on seafood, on root vegetables, and the use of root vegetables, I think, can be super, super interesting. And game, and also one thing that, you know, Americans don't eat much lamb. I think the lamb is really, really interesting, and just introduce a few things that are quite common in Scandinavia, but are quite unknown other, you know, in the United States. But also some things in our pantry is very similar to what you have perhaps in the Northeast and also in the Pacific Northwest, but you just use them differently. So so many of these ingredients are readily available.
I wanted to ask you about your restaurant, St. Lars, in Oslo. This restaurant is internationally known, and you feature the food of Norway, highlighting the local produce and meats. What was in your mind when you wanted to conceptualize this restaurant?
Well, it's not a Scandinavian restaurant per se. It's more like it's more like a bistro that has traveled from Paris to New York and then back to Oslo in a way. So it has these sort of but we wanted to create. I started a restaurant with a couple of friends, and we wanted to create excellent food that was really ambitious, but not snobbish. So we've got a huge charcoal grill that we use to make most of the food, and it's all in homage of Saint Lars, who's Saint Lawrence or San Lorenzo, and he was martyred in the 3rd century in Rome, actually, by being martyred on a griddle. And his famous last words to his executioners were, "I'm done, turn me and have a bite." So he's consequently, and I'm not kidding, he is the official patron saint of rotisserie chefs and comedians. And we thought that was a pretty good starting point. That. So the funny thing is, actually, we started the restaurant 12 years ago, and in connection with the book Dinner in Rome, I actually went to visit his shrine in Rome, just outside of Rome, one of the churches just on the periphery of the city, in his name, Basilica San Lorenzo Fiori in Muri, outside of the city walls, I want to put it in connection to one of the sort of big stories of our human existence, namely that fire helped transform us basically from apes to humans. That sometimes you've heard the story of how humans were so clever that we were the only ones to master fire. but most probably it was the other way around, that there was a clever ape that started to use fire and therefore was able to cook food, and therefore was able to get much more energy from the food and much better food security, and it sort of changed our intestines, the way we digested. We could use a lot less energy on digesting food and chewing food, and then this helped develop this unique brain that we have, that is the foundation of everything. So that's actually one of the last parts of the book, tying in with Saint Lars, feeling that, I thought it was, I thought it was pretty fun to have a restaurant named after a guy who was martyred on a griddle, and yeah. a little bit badass kind of thing. And now writing Dinner in Rome, I really felt that it was not a clever and badass kind of thing. I thought it was a profound thing, that this is where we come from. We are the cooking ape. We are gathered around the fire and preparing food, and this is what makes us human. This is what has made us human. Sort of our cognitive abilities come from this, but also this is what has made us a human, our joy of gathering together around a meal.
Andreas, I wanted to thank you for being on the podcast. I want to let everybody know that your book, Dinner in Rome, is out of this publication date, and November 1st, and people can watch your TV show, New Scandinavian Cooking, on PBS. Andreas, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was my conversation with Andreas Viestad about his book, Dinner in Rome, and more. I had a really great time talking to Andreas, and I want to mention that his book is available now for purchase online through distributors or at all better bookstores. I'm going to put a link to it in the bio. Please join me next week when we're going to talk with Emmanuel LaRoche with his book, Conversations Behind the Kitchen Door, 50 American Chefs Start Today's Food Culture. It was a great conversation, and I really love the book, and I want to promote it because it's really just phenomenal and very unique. Nothing else is like it, so you're going to want to pay attention to this conversation I'm going to have with Emmanuel next week. Until then, I hope that you have a really good week and you keep on cooking.